Just stop bothering her. She's not desperate.
Welcome to NerdGuyProductions. Today we're going to be reviewing The End of the Fucking World Season 2. I just finished watching The End of the Fucking World Season 2, so this is going to be a spoiler-filled review, so please watch it before you watch this. Heads up, it's good.
You know it is.
Now, I've seen a lot of criticisms for this season about it being too samey as the last season, as well as there being some rather forced conflict and everything. And I agree and disagree with that for a couple of reasons. As for there being a forced conflict, I do kind of agree. Bonnie coming after them 2 years after the fact, just to create some tension and then resolution for their stories. It is a little bit forced, I'll admit that. But personally, I find the character of Bonnie so compelling and well acted that I don't really care all that much. She was one of the highlights of season 2 for sure. As a matter of fact, the entire first episode is solely about her and her whole backstory, and from beginning to end, honestly, I just feel really bad for Bonnie. Like, she's been manipulated and fucked with her whole life. Her mother was extremely manipulative and insisted on these harsh punishments.
Eat it. What?
And then she met the Professor Clive, who was also manipulative and a rapist and murderer. I don't know if it was ever confirmed if he was a murderer or if he was just a rapist. Either way, he was a really bad dude. And even though she's the villain, like, she's the conflict that's coming after the two main characters that I want to live, I didn't want her to die or anything. I definitely wanted her to realize that what she was believing in was a fantasy, like it was just completely made up in her head. Which I suppose you could argue in the end she did and did not. I feel like it's a matter of opinion. Personally, I think she did realize, like, oh, I've made up this whole fantasy world and I can't live with myself anymore, and that's why she tried to kill herself. But I suppose you could say she just doesn't know what to believe anymore, and she doesn't want to go through with killing these two people, so she simply just wanted to kill herself for that reason. Either way, I'm very happy with the decision that they kept her character alive. Not necessarily to see anything with her in later seasons, but just the fact I didn't want her to kill herself because so many other people have manipulated her to going down this road. Like, that seemed too unfair, honestly. And even though Bonnie was a big part of this season, Alyssa is definitely the main character of this season. I think you could argue that in season 1, the major story has to do with James and his arc and transition from wanting to kill her to falling in love with her and then sacrificing everything for her. This one is entirely about Alyssa trying to find her place in this world, figure out what it is that she's after now that she's gone through something so traumatic and horrible. And even though she can be so mean and completely dry with people, she is still so compelling and likable in this weird way. Like, I feel like if she was an actual person, I would hate her guts. I'd be like, she is such an asshole. I can't deal with her. But the way the actress plays the character and everything, she's just so much fun to watch. Like, she is a real highlight of the season as well. All three of the main characters, honestly, are. I really like how they dealt with trauma and survivor's guilt and all these different elements in Alyssa's story and in James' story. They each suffered in their own way, and through that shared trauma, they're able to somewhat connect, but it's not the same trauma, and therefore there's still kind of a wall between the two during a lot of the season. And it's really nice to watch that wall come down and them eventually come back together the way, you know, you always wanted them to. Which leads me to another criticism I've seen for this season, where it kind of undoes the tragic ending of the first season and then instead replaces it with this much more optimistic and happy ending, to which I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I don't think this story had to have some tragic end for it to be true to its nature. I mean, I suppose you could argue It does go against the original comic that it's based off of, but I feel like for the show, this worked really well. The comedy is just as good as the first season is. I'd say there's probably a little bit less of it. This season did feel a little bit darker than the first one.
What the fuck, James?
I didn't want to make too much noise.
But not like an insane amount or anything. The first season had its fair share of gut punching moments the same way this one does. There's this ramping tension that mounts throughout the entire season, which to me feels very different than the first season. The first season, things don't get really tense and ominous until they kill another person, and then you're worried about them getting caught by the cops, you're worried that one of them might die. There's, you know, a lot of high stakes things that happen from that point onward, which if I remember correctly was like the midway point, like episode 3 or 4. And in this season, they introduce Bonnie right off the bat, and the fact that she is now a threat to at least Alyssa, and then you find out shortly after James as well. So the whole season is just this ramping tension of when is she going to actually try to kill them. And then when the moment finally happens, it's a really, really tense, awesome scene. Like, I loved how they did that whole thing. And even though the majority of the scene is just tension and raw emotion, there's still some pretty funny, clever little moments in there that make it feel like it's still the same show.
I've never been so happy and so sad to see someone.
The cinematography is just as good, if not better, than the first season. There's some really gorgeous camera work in this, actually. The editing and the pacing of this season were really good. Maybe a bit slower than the first season, but still very engaging. It always just, you know, keeps heading into the next idea, the next scene. As a matter of fact, this is one of those shows that I really tried not to binge just because the episodes are so short. I wanted to enjoy it for at least the next week or so, and I just couldn't do it. Every episode is so engaging, it just pulls you in, making you want more and more and more until you're done with the season, because it's still only 8 episodes, and each episode's about 19 to like 25 minutes long. The music was great, always very situational, fitting the mood, either the pure awkwardness of a certain conversation or the intensity of another one. The acting was really, really good. Just like the first season, the two main characters really make you like them despite how antisocial and frankly mean they can be sometimes. Same goes for Bonnie, because as much as you recognize the fact that she's the villain-ish and is trying to kill the two main characters, you can't help but find her kind of funny sometimes and feeling pretty sorry for her because of all the things she's been through.
Good.
So, overall, I would give the second season, I don't think it was better than the first season, which I know I rated an 8 out of 10, because it also wasn't perfect. I would probably give it like a 7.8. It was very close to being as good as the first season, but not quite. I feel like that slightly slower pace and the somewhat forced conflict of the season is what pulls it back just a little bit. But regardless, it's very good. I do recommend people watch it. It's an unlikely addition to a story that I think a lot of people thought was over at the end of season 1, and I think a lot of people were also worried about how it would be continued, like would it be worth it, and I personally think it is, but I can also see how some people feel like it's a bit redundant. Regardless, I recommend that you go watch it. I thought it was pretty damn good, and every episode is rather short, and there's only 8 episodes. It really won't take you much time to get through it. And I think that's about it.